All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining our ABNY Boardroom Breakfast. We're so excited to host Clare Newman, the President and CEO of the Trust for Governors Island, in this special Boardroom Breakfast moderated by the very own chair of ABNY, Michael Rudin. Michael Rudin is the Senior Vice President at Rudin Management Company, and he's going to serve as the moderator for this event. We're so lucky to have both Clare and Michael. And before we get started, just wanted to remind everyone to submit all your questions throughout the presentation through the Q&A function on Zoom. We will address them at the end. So just want to make sure that if anything comes up, we'll get there. And as always, please spread the word. We're at A Better NY on all social media accounts, and we hope that you let others know about ABNY programming and continue to be engaged in ABNY. So without further ado, I will pass the screen to Michael. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for an exciting conversation. I'm happy to be here with you and be interviewing and having a conversation with Clare Newman. Clare serves as the President and CEO of the Trust for Governors Island, charged with planning, redevelopment, and ongoing operations of 150 acres of Governors Island. Clare comes to the TGI from Brooklyn Navy Yard Development Corporation, where as Chief of Staff and Executive Vice President, she implemented projects to create jobs and foster development. Clare was previously a senior leader at Bloomberg Philanthropies and a Vice President at NYC EDC. She received a Master's of Urban Planning from Columbia and a BA with honors from Williams College. I personally have had the pleasure of knowing Clare for the last 8 years, ever since my firm started working on a project in the Navy Yard, and have had the good fortune of getting to know her personally over that time. And so I'm extra excited to be speaking with her today. So without further ado, I will dive into the questions. Clare, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you start with an introduction of your role and responsibilities as President and CEO at the Trust for Governors Island?
Yes, absolutely. And thanks to ABNY for having me, and thrilled to be here with Michael, who at this point is an old friend. The Trust for Governors Island is a really interesting place, and I think hopefully we'll, in this conversation, talk a little bit about place-based development in New York City, which has really been, I think, instrumental in creating jobs across the city, creating fabulous park space, and so many things that we now recognize as really important and unique parts of the city's landscape. But here on Governors Island, we really function as our own little small city. And that's part of what makes the job and the role in coming to Governors Island such a fun and unique opportunity. When you come to the island, it really feels like you've arrived in something that's very much a part of New York City, but also feels like a world apart. And so our job is really to operate and make sure this little part of the city is a fantastic resource. And we do everything on the island, from running the ferries to taking care of the beautiful historic buildings on the island, to maintaining and operating the park, repairing infrastructure. And so, part of, I think, what makes it exciting in this job, and hopefully what makes it exciting for folks who work for Governors Island, is that no single day is the same. And I think people really take pride in just delivering on the idea that Governors Island, when you come to it, is a fantastic journey away, and you feel like you are part of this really unified experience, from when you first get on the ferry to having a drink to exploring the park, and just enjoying the beautiful views of Brooklyn, Lower Manhattan, everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think, a place that many New Yorkers probably take for granted and don't, haven't appreciated. And I know a big part of, why you decided to move over to this position is to help, sort of change that perception and the way that it's used and appreciated by all New Yorkers.
Mm-hmm.
So can you give us a little background? I sort of touched on your background a little bit, but could you give the group a little bit more of background into how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, totally. It's funny now, you talk to people who knew what they wanted to be from a very young age, or in high school or in college, and that definitely wasn't me. I grew up in New York City in the East Village, and I think because of that, urban development and sort of the urban landscape has always been part of my DNA. And it's funny now to think about wandering around New York as a kid and you look at the roofs of buildings and say to yourself, shouldn't we put trees up there? And like, wouldn't it be nice if everyone could bike around more easily? And so, the sort of contemplation of urban space, I think, was always part of what I cared about and was interested in. But after leaving New York to go to college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I thought maybe about architecture and did a stint doing Teach for America. But when I returned to the city and started doing sort of dabbling in different things, I realized I didn't probably have the constitution for architecture. Infinite respect for all the architects who might be on the call today, and the detail that required, but I didn't lose the sort of love for environment and for the potential of places to really make a difference within a broader neighborhood community. So I decided to go to school for urban planning. And from there, fell into a really great internship at the city's Economic Development Corporation and fell in love with, again, economic development, creating quality jobs, thinking through workforce development, but paired with this idea that, we in the city can think about specific nodes, whether it be in Jamaica, Queens, where I first knew Melva, or the Governor's Island or the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and how that could actually have a positive impact beyond the boundaries of the site. So, since then, for the past, whatever it's been, 15 years, that's really been what I focused on: public-private partnerships and place-based development within the 5 boroughs.
Well, I can certainly relate to the not having the fortitude to be an architect. I have my undergraduate degree in urban planning, and in my college had the option to be an architect, and did not go down that path. But many of my best friends from college were in the architecture program, and I was always thankful that I wasn't having to do their studios, up until the late hours of the morning, and then not only that, but then the critiques at the end of the project, and being picked apart by the panel. So as Claire said, kudos to all of anybody out there who's an architect and can handle that.
To be up to 4 a.m. 3 months running and then get a.
I would just go to the studios and sit there and watch them do their work and like have a beer while they were slaving over their models and their projects. But didn't want to have to be doing that myself. So that's all very great, and a big thing for me as well, and kind of a little bit of the opposite, obviously in my family business, but I did know from a relatively young age, I think I was about 16, that I wanted to get into real estate. But similar to you, wanted to take a path that I saw was kind of less typical in terms of having a sort of a business background. I wanted to have an urban planning background to really understand how cities work and why they work and what makes a certain place more successful than something else. And so that's a little bit sort of my experience in sort of the urban planning world. And I think that in terms of the business that we're in, really brings a unique perspective that certainly there are others like us who have an urban planning background, but definitely a different perspective than what most people have or bring to the table.
Totally.
So as I mentioned, I had the pleasure of working with Claire for a number of years while we were developing Dock 72 in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Could you tell us a little bit, about your time, working in the public sector? For those of you who don't know, the Brooklyn Navy Yard is owned by the city of New York. And so, but one thing that you were very focused on, and as well as David and Andrew Kimball before him, was really bringing in the private sector to help, to help grow the Navy Yard. So, a little bit about, that experience, as well as, your role at the EDC and at Bloomberg Philanthropies, and how that, those roles prepared you for your role now at Governor's Island.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's a good segue from the conversation around urban planning, because I do really believe with these public projects or public-private private projects, starting from a place of understanding what the city's broader goals are for any given development opportunity or any place is critical. And that process has to engage a huge number of different folks, from local community boards, elected officials, different stakeholders within a neighborhood or surrounding community, so that you get a sense of really where the potential impact is, and pair that with the broader policy goals of the city. And in the case of the Navy Yard, and it was a blessing to have a mission that was so clear. That was really about creating jobs, and in particular, jobs that created credible pathways to the middle class. But obviously, that isn't something that one can go out and do alone. And so, as the sort of nonprofit, mission-driven organization that's at the helm, finding the right partners to join you in different parts of that mission and then putting them together, I think, is where a lot of the magic comes in. And so, you think back to the Dock 72 project, where at the Navy Yard, we knew that our strength wasn't in building large ground up commercial offices, and went out and were lucky enough to find great partners in the Rudin organization and in Boston Properties, who I think really believed in, and it might still believes in, the mission of the Navy Yard, and that a part of what makes that place magic is the idea that we can, through this partnership, help to create homes for small businesses and help to create an ecosystem at the Navy Yard that really is about innovation and helping to keep small manufacturing alive in New York City. But in addition to finding the right developer to help create those spaces to do that, then we on our side as the nonprofit were able to pair that and create partnerships with our workforce development organization, with the closest CUNY campus, which in the case of the Navy Yard is City Tech, and make sure that on our side of the house, with a willing partner, creating those pipelines and delivering on the big picture there. So that sort of thinking about how do we bring together the right group of partners, each of whom brings their own strength and together can much more readily accomplish the big picture of the mission, I think is so important to any of this work we do. And obviously has been instrumental on the flip side to what's happened in Governor's Island over the past 10, 20 years now, where, we started with this campus that had been effectively abandoned by the Coast Guard and left to sit there, and really brought together an extraordinary group of partners to help breathe life back into the island, whether it be small food and beverage businesses, whether it's Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, who's opened a fantastic arts hub on the island. DOE has a fantastic public school, the Harbor School on the island, that really takes advantage of the surrounding waterways. And so again, thinking through what is it we want to achieve on Governor's Island as a public space, and then who are the right partners who actually believe in that mission, but bring their own forms of expertise to help us get to that goal, I think is the thread through so much of this work, and what helped prepare me for this current role.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, your background of blending the public and private worlds, is, I think, again, probably part of what attracted you to this role, and will make you a very good fit for for bringing Governor's Island into sort of the next phase of life. Let's switch sort of gears for a second before we get more into sort of what what has been going on in the recent past, and what sort of plan for the future. Obviously, the last year, has thrown everything up in the air for everybody. Can you tell the audience a little bit about how COVID-19 affected Governor's Island and tourism and events and the initiatives that sort of had been planned for for last year and going into this year?
Yeah, totally. I think everyone's probably shorthand answer on questions like this is it was a nightmare. But much more substantively, I think we're extraordinarily blessed to have a team of folks who love the island and care about New York, and care about partners and our visitors. And I think we were able to sort of rise to the challenge of the last year in a way that I think we're really proud of. Like everyone in the spring, it was a lot about just trying to stabilize financially and make sure folks on the team were staying healthy and that the public who comes to the island was staying healthy. And we took that opportunity over the spring months to really think about how can we reopen the island in a way that is both, one, safe, of course, first and foremost, and help the city's efforts to stop the spread of COVID. And then two, really double down on our efforts to provide equitable access to open space in a time where obviously that was needed for New Yorkers more than anybody, or more than ever is what I mean to say. And so what we did is we delayed our opening from May 1st to July 15th. And when we reopened, we were able to put in place a whole new series of health and safety precautions. Like a lot of folks, we stood up a time ticketing system to make sure that we didn't have an overload on our ferries. We worked really closely with the small businesses who call the island home and are proud to say that effectively all of our food and beverage vendors were able to reopen on the island this past season. And we worked also closely with our year-round tenants and our arts and cultural organizations to make sure that they were getting the support they needed to sort of make it through the season in a way that helped to add to, obviously everyone was struggling, right? That helped to add to their also broader missions. And by the end of the summer, we had just over 200,000 visitors, predominantly from Brooklyn and Manhattan, but really we had visitors from every single zip code in the 5 boroughs. And the sort of joy of seeing folks get off the boat and take a breath and feel like, oh my God, I have a respite and a break from what we've sort of all had to endure in our tiny apartments over the course of however long it's been now is, I think, for everybody extraordinarily gratifying.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm, obviously being an outdoor sort of oriented, institution certainly helps, and I know it was a big sort of relief for a lot of people, just like many other sort of the great parks that we have throughout the city. And so I'm glad to hear that you guys were able to sort of adapt, like so many others were, and still be able to provide so many great things, not only for tourists and visitors, but also so many small businesses to help them sort of make it through.
Yeah, weather the storm, as it were.
Yeah. So I know specifically, last summer, the trust worked and partnered with the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council and 18 other cultural organizations to create the Governor's Island Residency Initiative, which hosted residency programs for artists impacted by COVID-19, as you were sort of just mentioning. Can you talk a little bit about the sort of how that came about with those various, I mean, obviously 20 different cultural organizations coming together is probably no easy task, but talk a little bit about that and some of the key takeaways that, you guys learned from last summer and maybe might be applying to, this summer and beyond.
Yeah, totally. I, definitely not an easy task, and kudos to the arts and culture team on the island and the operations team. But, again, in that spring season, in a typical year, we have a whole series of historic houses on Governor's Island, for those who aren't familiar, in Nolan Park and Colonel's Row, which were the old officers' housing from the Army days. And those aren't occupiable year round, but over the course of really the past 5 or 6 years now, we've figured out a way to activate them on a seasonal basis by bringing in nonprofit organizations and arts, culture, environment, education, there's kids programming, everything, who do public events all public season long. Needless to say, in 2020, the idea of having tightly packed public events within these houses didn't make any sense. But we really got together with all 19 of these organizations and asked the question, look, how can we utilize this space in a way that still supports both our mission and your respective missions, and that is also safe. And so this idea of creating an artist residency program, particularly focused on New York City-based artists who'd been negatively impacted by the pandemic, came to light. And LMCC, who has a huge amount of experience in running artist residency programs, was able to partner with us and this broader coalition of smaller arts and culture orgs on the island to bring together a cohesive program. And so what we did was we looked through all the houses and figured out how many folks can we fit in here in a way where we're maintaining social distance, where adhering to obviously all of state, city, federal guidelines, but maximize the ability for us to use this space to support artists. And so we ran an open call, and at the end of the day, we had over 100 artists working on the island over the course of the year, folks who'd lost their studio space or who wanted to take the opportunity to respond to, I think, various really critical issues that have arisen broadly across the 5 boroughs over the course of the last year and make the most of the opportunity on the island. And I think for many, it really was a lifeline in terms of their practice, but coupled in a way that kept a vibrancy in the buildings, kept the nonprofit organizations being able to pursue their broader missions through the island. Because last season was, I think, not what anyone expected, we've basically offered all of those folks who sort of stood by the city and stood by the island and their artist community last year an opportunity to return in this upcoming season, and are now in the process of working through how do we blend the artist residency program, which was so successful, with what we presume will be an increased ability to welcome audience, either to the outdoor spaces surrounding the houses or to the indoor spaces in a way that's much safer this year than it would have been last year. And basically allow them the opportunity to have essentially a 2-year program on the island where they use last year's work to guide much more public engagement and public presentation in the upcoming year.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's, amazing to, again, be able to adapt in a short period of time and then offer such a great, resource or sort of safe harbor and space for so many. How many artists roughly were, participated in the program?
I think it was just over 100, so maybe 108, something like this. But we were happy with that, obviously.
That's incredible, right? I mean, 100 artists or 100 plus, right, would otherwise not have a space to work, and that's an amazing thing to be able to offer to them. Let's talk a little bit about the Center for Climate Solutions. So past September, Mayor de Blasio and the Trust announced plans to develop a Center for Climate Solutions. Tell us a little bit more about that and what the planning process has been like, and sort of what the public can expect in the future from that.
Yeah, totally. So, Governor's Island has been obviously a very interesting journey in terms of its own growth. And, Michael, as you alluded to, there's been a lot of work on the island over the past, I guess at this point, 15 years, really even before the transfer from federal ownership to the local government, thinking about how can we use this extraordinary asset that has been closed to the city for centuries in a way that's really beneficial for New Yorkers. And I bet you feel the same way, Michael. Like I had never heard of, let alone been to Governor's Island, and had grown up like 2 miles away.
But I will admit that I have never been to Governor's Island, so I will have to come.
Well, we have to change that. That's terrible. But now I think you're an exception. I think you're hard pressed to find something like that in New York now. But from the beginning, like way back in the day, back in 2005, when the, folks were thinking about what do we do with the space, the idea that it be a public resource was always core to what people wanted to see with the island. And Leslie Koch, who's president here, really led the charge on creating a fantastic award-winning park on the island that people now know and love. But coupled with that has always been the idea of turning it into a 24/7, 365 part of New York City through mixed-use development. And when the island first came back into local control, there were RFPs issued, really asking folks around the world, here's this truly phenomenal surprise resource. What would you do here? And the idea is folks got back, ran the gamut. I think there was a SpongeBob SquarePants theme park proposed, like really anything you could imagine has been thought of for Governor's Island. But, over the past 18 months, couple of years, we've really honed in on this idea of coupling one of our core missions, which is education, with a community of innovation and a community of small businesses and educational practice that has grown organically on the island over the years, which is focused on environment. And when you come to the island and you go to the top of Outlook Hill and look out over the harbor, it's impossible not to think about issues like climate change. So we started doing research about what role could Governor's Island play in helping to advance the thinking, but in particular, the public engagement around issues of climate change, and went out and did a ton of interviews with experts in the field from around the country, really globally, and crystallized it on this idea of bringing together a first of its kind cross-sector climate solutions center on the island, where we could focus on some of the stuff that there isn't as much density of in the space right now in terms of thinking, really related to climate adaptation, related to public engagement around climate solutions and showing folks what truly sustainable and resilient urban development can look like in a way that hopefully is inspiring. And focused as well on how we as New York City, dense urban New York City communities can adapt in the coming years and decades to what we're all going to experience in terms of increased climate related crises. So, we're super excited about that. We're in the middle of a rezoning process now that would be required to support the Climate Solutions Center, and we're also continuing to advance the strategic planning and outreach so that this year we'll be able to put out an RFP looking for partners to join us in this effort, join the city in this effort to create a Climate Solutions Center.
I mean, that's great. Obviously, a a very pertinent topic these days, but the last decade or two. So it's great to see that that you guys and the city are sort of coming together to try and provide this type of resource again for such an important topic. Can you sort of look forward a little bit and talk about maybe how you think that the Center for Climate Solutions will change Governor's Island in the way that people think about sustainability in New York City and the urban environment?
Yeah, totally. I think for us, one of the ways we've started to think about this and really crystallize some of the planning around the effort is, what could you do by building an institution like this and a campus like this on Governor's Island that you couldn't do if it just happened on some university's home campus, in the quote unquote ivory tower? And for us, that really revolves, I think, around three things. First, as I mentioned, is this idea of being able to spotlight the latest and greatest technology vis-a-vis sustainability and resiliency, and put that in a space where you can actually focus both local and global attention on what that looks like. And we believe that that's very important to helping with scalability and replicability of the types of solutions that I think we all know we desperately need. So that's one, and I do think that that's something that, again, if you did this in some campus off the beaten track, would you get that kind of attention, and would you be able to really use those as educational tools and as tools for feedback? And then the second, again, sort of related to that, is curating pipelines for engagement and nesting this kind of use in an authentically diverse community of nonprofit and citywide organizations, where for us, we have this rich arts and cultural community. We've been out talking to different nonprofits who do workforce development, who are focused in educational pathways, focused on issues of environmental justice, and making sure that when we do this, we're putting it in, again, a mix of different uses where we can really see the sort of innovation that comes with that. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just a problem of science anymore, it's also a problem of policy, it's a problem of communication, and it's a problem of advocacy. That as we develop these solutions, they're also being implemented in a way that's equitable. And then the third thing, which I started to allude to earlier, is that I think a lot of the scientists we talk to, or climate experts we talk to, think about climate as a triangle where you have pure science, you have thinking around mitigation, how do we reduce carbon output, energy technologies, energy savings measures, and then a sort of third prong of the triangle, which is about adaptation. Because the unfortunate reality is that even if carbon output dropped to zero tomorrow, we're still going to be dealing with the impacts of climate change. And that third prong hasn't gotten as much attention because there's no sort of silver bullet solution, but it is where a lot of the hard work around how we as communities are going to have to change and adapt in the face of this and build resiliency, that we think Governor's Island can play a particularly strong role in, given the folks across the broader New York community that can be brought into the fold and help collectively to think about new and different approaches to these issues.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's amazing. I was speaking on a panel last night for the NYU Shack Institute of Real Estate, and it was focused on sustainability in the built environment. And again, all of these topics are exceptionally timely and important. So it's really great to hear, and especially kind of as you mentioned, that those sort of three aspects of sustainability, and some have been more of a focus for a longer period of time than others. But again, it needs to be a from all aspects of this, a comprehensive approach, and have buy-in and participation from all key stakeholders. So that's great to hear that you guys are taking that that approach. You've I want to we'll get to the sort of the future in a moment, but I want to look back at the past, and I know a little bit about the history, but would love to hear from you, and to share with the audience what some of the past uses and history of the island have been. I mean, it sounds like a lot of similarities in some ways to the Brooklyn Navy Yard. It was owned by the federal government for a long period of time, and then kind of left to just sort of just fallow there, and not much happen. So could you talk a little bit about the history and sort of how Governor's Island was utilized in the past, and how it got to where it is today, or over the last 15-20 years?
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. There are a lot of similarities there, and it is a story. These sort of former federal, particularly military industrial complex locations within cities that eventually got abandoned is really not the right word, but closed, and then how cities think about, wow, we just came into this sort of unknown asset, and what do we do with it, right? For Governor's Island, the history really starts with very early usage by the Lenape as a hunting and fishing camp, and then the original square footage of the island is much smaller than it is today. In about 1801, the U.S. Army built a facility on Governor's Island that was a part of the broader Eastern Seaboard's strategic coastal defense system. And you look at where the island's location is in the mouth of the harbor, and that was really one prong, a whole line of facilities that went up and down the Eastern Seaboard, again, coastal defense. And when they were there, they built a couple of the buildings that now are still managed by National Park Service and are national monuments, one of which is Castle Williams and the other which is Fort Jay. And in the early 1900s, the island went from being a much smaller dot in the harbor. It was expanded really to almost double its size, using fill from construction of one of the New York City subway lines, and the federal government added about 100 acres of property to the island. So, again, for folks who really know the island well, that string of buildings that's known as Colonel's Row used to all be waterfront homes. And so the colonels who lived there had these beautiful views out over the Statue of Liberty and the New York Harbor, and then the whole southern part of the island was added. In the mid 60s, the Coast Guard took over from the Army, and they added a whole bunch more infrastructure. And when the Coast Guard was there, the island really did function as its own little city. So there were about 3,000 people who lived on the island day in, day out. They had an elementary school, they had grocery stores, they had a bowling alley, a Burger King. And it was the only Burger King in the country that served beer, apparently. I'm pretty sure that's true, but
all resources you need.
Yeah, exactly. Everything you need to never leave. And, I think they built 14-story barrack buildings. So it was really quite densely populated at its time. And again, sort of this whole little neighborhood in and of itself. But as part of broader federal consolidation efforts, it closed in 1996. And there was a long conversation for many years between the federal government, between the governor of New York, the mayor of New York, of what are we going to do with this thing and how do we get it back into the city's hands? And President Clinton created the national monument that I mentioned, I think in 2001. And then the remainder of the island, the other 150 acres, were sold to a joint partnership of the city and state in 2003. And, you know, since then, it really has been, as we talked about, a journey and thinking through and engaging the public broadly, and what do we want to see Governor's Island used for that really fit within these guidelines of making it an authentic public space. And ergo, the creation of the park, ergo really trying to draw audience to the island. The island opened to the public for the first time in 2005, and 8,000 people came to see it that year. In 2020, obviously, it was a little different, but in 2019, we had nearly 1 million visitors. So that's really been a story of 15 years of growth and outreach and getting the island back onto the mental map of New Yorkers, which of course has happened partially because of the efforts of the mayor's office and the Trust for Governor's Island, but also because of the efforts of the school we have on the island, our arts and cultural partners, and all of the food and beverage vendors and environmental actors who are out there and doing outreach to their own communities and saying, essentially, come see this great place and see what we've been able to achieve out here. So the history is really fascinating. And, you know, again, the sort of crystallization around the mission of this unique place post-federal departure, I think, has guided so much of what's happened out here over the past decades.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, a much more detailed history than I, you know, ever knew. And, you know, but again, it speaks to, you know, again, a lot of parallels to the Brooklyn Navy Yard and sort of what happened there over, you know, almost 2 centuries. And, you know, and I think, you know, speaks to, you know, the special aspects of New York City, that, you know, there are these little pockets and jewels and things that people, you know, don't know about because they've been, you know, sorry, you know, been, you know, either controlled by the federal government or maybe, you know, state government in some cases, that the general public don't have, you know, don't have access to, and don't, you know, have no opportunity to know about. And, you know, through the course of time, right, being, you know, uses or needs changing, and
Yeah.
you know, being sort of not gifted. Obviously, I know there was, you know, sort of probably a monetary, you know, sort of consideration for the city and the state taking it over, but you know, sort of returned to the public, and you know, allowing for, you know, for the public to start, you know, appreciating and using and supporting, right? I mean, if you, you know, you think about 8,000 people in 2005 and 1 million in 2019, I mean, that's just, you know, that's a huge, you know, huge growth over a relatively short period of time, and, you know, especially for a place that you can only get to by ferry, right? So you know, just amazing to, you know, again, to hear that, you know, that history and that story, and then to think, you know, in the last, you know, 15 years, 17 years, whatever it's been, you know, you know, to see what's been accomplished in that relatively, again, short period of time, but also, you know, to sort of to look, you know, to the future, and, you know, everything that you're working on, which, you know, you've touched on a little bit. And so, you know, to that end, obviously a lot of, you know, a lot of exciting changes on the horizon for Governor's Island. You touched a little bit on the rezoning process for, you know, doing the Center for Climate Solutions. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and you know, sort of the timeline and the phases, and what sort of the public can expect over the next, you know, 5-10 years?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, you know, Michael, the point you just made about the over time is really important to all of these processes. That, you know, sometimes we have this idea that somebody's going to go out with the right answer off the bat, or there's going to be this master planning effort, and we're just going to know what we want to do on a place. And I think, you know, successful stories like this in New York, whether, again, you're looking at the Navy Yard, or you're looking at Hudson River Park, or Brooklyn Bridge Park, or, you know, the Trust for Governor's Island, that stuff has to have a balance the planning with actually looking at how folks organically are using the island and what naturally occurs there, and then thinking about how we can sort of leverage that and steer it in a way that is, again, accretive to a mission. And I do think for us, so much of where we are today is because we've seen how the public comes to the island and how they use it and what they love about it. And we've seen the kinds of partners that we've been able to attract, Again, whether it be the Harbor School who want to utilize the surrounding water, or arts and cultural organizations who see the public space as a fantastic place for presentation of work, and like actually allow that to change what you're doing. So those two things, how they come together and evolve over time, I think is critical to the story, and will be critical over the course of the next 5 and 10 years as this planning continues. But to answer your question most specifically, we will put out a solicitation this year. This first RFP that goes out is really going to be focused on universities or nonprofit research organizations who specialize in climate. And I think one of the things we plan to do in the forthcoming solicitation is be cognizant of the goals of the city we want to foreground, which is about this cross-disciplinary approach, about centering issues of equity and environmental justice, centering issues of public engagement and what we want to see on the island from an urban design perspective. And then really asking these nonprofit partners or these universities, how can this opportunity advance your goals, and how do you see it fitting into the climate work that you are doing in your strategic plan, so that collectively our belief is that that's going to help to inspire some of the most creative and innovative thinking by leaving enough room in that solicitation that folks can bring their best thinking to bear on the project. One of the things we've been doing at the Trust and in partnership with the Mayor's Office over the past month is we've had a process with our Community Advisory Council over a number of different sessions to really talk through what we collectively as the city want to see that RFP ask for and what we want it to say. And so, asking folks, how do we want to steer the conversations around workforce development and educational pipelines? How do we want to talk in the RFP about the opportunities for public engagement? And how do we want to talk in the RFP about what our sort of, again, collective vision is for what the architecture will bring, what the sustainability and resiliency initiatives will bring, and making sure that our solicitation really reflects that best thinking from, I don't remember how many folks are on our Community Advisory Council, probably 30 different organizations, elected officials, other stakeholders, island partners, which we're very hopeful will, again, sort of not just mean that the RFP itself is successful, but also that it is as impactful as possible to New Yorkers who are enjoying the island today. And then, over the next 5 to 10 years, I think what we really hope is that this is going to enable us to have the island open year round. It's going to enable to have the island open 24 hours a day. It's going to enable us to really increase ferry service and just make it a much more connected part of New York, so that folks who live in Brooklyn can come and work on the island. Folks who live in any of the 5 boroughs can come to the park much more easily on the weekend. Harbor School kids will be able to get to school much more easily, and really invest back into the public aspect of things and the way we're able to provide access to the island, again, across the city.
I mean, certainly, a ambitious, plan, but again, much needed and focused on, a lot of areas of need, right, and importance in today's world. One thing you've touched on it a little bit, and sort of, piques my interest a little bit, just because it sounds like a cool aspect of the yard that I don't know much about, the island that I don't know much about. But could you just give us like a quick overview of the Harbor School and sort of what?
Oh yeah,
sounds like a cool place to go to school.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it is. You have kids, Michael. You get ready.
Yeah.
So the Harbor School is our first year-round tenant. It's a public DOE school. There's kids from, again, every zip code in the city who go to the school, and we're one of New York City's early CTE schools. And in particular, what the Harbor School focuses on are careers, or I should say, preparing high schoolers for careers or college pathways in sort of water-based jobs. So marine biology, maritime technology, boat driving and repair, aquaculture, diving programs, and really everything that we can imagine that relates to New York being a city of water. So they're an extraordinarily popular and I think in demand New York City high school, and the diversity of the types of offerings there and the way they're able to utilize the sort of island itself and the surrounding waterways, I think is part of what that has made this a successful partnership.
Yeah, definitely. Again, definitely something that most people don't know about or
Yeah.
appreciate about the island, and one of the amazing resources and sort of things that is going on that most people don't know about, but provides a incredibly meaningful um, sort of resource or outlet for for people who are interested in those those types of jobs. And
Yeah, exactly. Especially now that the city, I mean, like the city's evolution to actually engaging with and welcoming the waterfront, obviously that's been a 20-year journey, but it's extraordinary how far that's come, and there's still more we can do. But
yeah, I mean, you think of other global cities that are so proximate to multiple waterways, and how those cities utilize and relate to water, and then you think about New York City and how for so many years and decades that the water was kind of shunned or really focused from an industrial standpoint or
totally.
whatever it may
Yeah.
be, and didn't really have, right, the public didn't have the opportunities to to engage in being involved with the water and all the things that it has to offer being on an island, or a series of islands. We are here in the five boroughs. So this has been really great. I'm going to start. Sarah's been sending me some audience questions. So um, uh, some of the sort of things that you've been experimenting with over the last year or so. Could you talk a little bit about how those have worked? The glamping initiative, I know, I think last summer, and share with us how how those have gone, what's been successful, what the challenges have been, and what you've learned from those, and maybe sort of what's going to be coming in the future.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think in particular, this person, Michael, you just mentioned the glamping. I think that has been a tremendous learning experience because they've really been our first overnight tenant, and I mean, since the Coast Guard departed. And so I think that's helped us to learn a lot about how we prepare the island for overnight use. They've been extraordinarily successful as a business operating on the island, and I don't know that anyone would have thought that there was a ton of New Yorkers who wanted to go and stay in a tent for a night, but there are, and we've been happy to see that it's drawn both. I think
Certainly, again, a great outlet in in COVID world.
Yes, exactly. I did it, and I brought my son, who's now 6, and it was maybe the best night of his life.
Yeah,
So
the whole new meaning to the term staycation.
yeah,
Right?
exactly. So they've really been able to, I think, attract a local audience, but then also an audience from the tri-state area or visitors to New York City who want to have the experience. It does feel totally different. You can like grill your own dinner and all that kind of fun stuff. And they've also, the trust and our government affairs team and public affairs team early on in that process made sure, again, to sort of forge partnerships. We had to have a partnership with the YMCA, and to make sure that on a few nights during the season that we're also getting kids into the space, and there's a community night where all the tents are offered at a dramatically discounted rate. So everyone sign up for collective retreats like newsletter and e-alerts, because you can be one of the people who snag the cheap tents and have a night on the island. But again, from a business perspective, they've been doing really well, as have our food and beverage concessionaires. And I think for that too, we've sort of been able over time to fine tune the right amount of and diversity of food and beverage offerings on the island, so that members of the public can choose what kind of experience that is, whether they want to eat oysters and have a cocktail, or whether they want to just grab a slice of pizza and a hot dog, and make sure that that appeals to the whole range of people who come to the island, whether it be families with their kids, whether it be folks who want to do their own grilling and not spend a dollar, or whether it be people who want to come and like do the sort of view of Manhattan and Friday night experience.
Yeah, again, definitely something, that most people don't know, exists or is even, an option. And, I think, again, a great resource and outlet, particularly over the past year. I
Yeah,
assume it was probably pretty consistently booked last summer as again, an outlet for people to, escape the, the lockdown and being, stuck at home for, so many, days.
totally.
Um, what a question from the audience: what partnerships are available with corporations, small businesses, and or nonprofits at the island?
Yeah, thanks for that. So we have a bunch of stuff that happens every year, and then also opportunities that come up, over time. One is every season we sort of reopen the doors to new concessionaires, whether you want to, use the island to, as I said, sell hot dogs, drinks, all that kind of stuff, anything that the public might need in coming to visit the island. We have a couple of small summer camps that operate out here. We have a place where you can do a zip line or rock climb, do mini golfing. So there's always opportunities available for amenity-based uses on the island. In addition to that, we run our yearly program where we look for nonprofits in particular to take advantage of the Colonel's Row and Nolan Park houses. And that's pretty open door. What we just ask for is use the space how you want, but on the weekends, we want you to do something that's open to the public so they can see the art that's being created, or there's some kind of like crafting program that's geared toward kids. We had CUNY ran like a volcano lab there last year, and the kids would come in and put on the VR glasses and like learn about volcanoes. It was super popular, that kind of thing. And then, we've really, in addition to working on the rezoning and the climate center, we've been focused as well in parallel with that about reactivating more of the North Island historic buildings for year-round use. And so we've been putting out strategic RFPs, looking for partners, whether nonprofit or for-profit, who want to take one of these buildings and adaptively reuse them. So we just announced 4 new year-round tenants in Nolan Park last month: the Beam Center, Billion Oyster Project, Shandenken, and Institute for Public Architecture, who are going to help build out a real cultural campus in Nolan Park, a year-round cultural campus, I should say. And an RFP for another beautiful building on Governor's Island. It was actually the former elementary school. And that one was focused on creating a space to support small business and nonprofits who are in green tech, blue tech, various environmental fields. And we just got responses to that RFP a couple of weeks ago. We're super happy with the responses we got there. So we expect to keep putting out more North Island RFPs, each year as well. And again, focus on getting those historic buildings adaptively reused and put into either use that's supporting job creation or arts and cultural uses, amenities for the public. Those are the sort of 3 buckets we've been focused on.
Yeah, I mean, it's all, it's all so amazing, right? The the interest is obviously great, but right, the ability and the fact that you and the have you know the ability to sort of bring together all these different uses and sort of ideas to to activate and repurpose the island is incredible. Another question is, what lessons can Governor's Island and the Navy Yard offer for longer term projects to repurpose other places such as Rikers Island and other sort of maybe government controlled islands or locations throughout the 5 boroughs?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that. I think, Rikers in particular is such a great question. And I think the team at City Hall, I'm obviously not as intimately familiar with their work, but I think they have really taken the time and are taking the time to do a very, very broad engagement process and what we collectively want to see on the island on Rikers. And it's worth it, there's taking those months, taking those years to have a really robust process with a breadth of stakeholders, again, to make sure that we're prioritizing the right things for Rikers, I think is critically important. And the folks who are leading that effort, I think are really being thoughtful about that whole planning process. As people know, I think that island too is being really focused on green and on preparing the city for a much more sustainable future, as well as on creating pathways for workforce development for New Yorkers. But I do think that sort of primary lesson of thinking through the unique attributes of the place and what can be offered there that you can't do in other parts of the city, right? Like it would be a shame to see on Governor's Island something that you could have just plopped in Midtown Manhattan in an office building. But what is special about this place environmentally, from an iconography perspective, from the perspective of public use on the island, that provide a really unique opportunity for the city. And I think that way of thinking certainly informed what the Brooklyn Navy Yard has evolved into, and will inform as well sort of future opportunities like this as they arise for New York.
Yeah, that is very helpful, and again, so many great lessons to be learned from places like Governor's Island, like the Navy Yard, to hopefully inform sort of other areas and opportunities. And I think, like you said, right, it's not, none of this happens overnight. You can't just snap your fingers and say, hey, look, we've got this great plan. It takes time, and it takes engagement and collaboration with the communities and stakeholders, to hopefully formulate a really impactful sort of plan or master plan, whatever it may be. So I think one more question before we run out of time here. Will the development of the Center for Climate Change be similar in any ways to the development of the Cornell Technion campus on Roosevelt Island?
Yeah, I think we're obviously taking a lot of lessons for that process. I had the great pleasure of getting to run that RFP for EDC back in the day, and worked in obviously with a lot of folks at EDC and across the city on that process. And the strategic planning work that led to that, which obviously involved, again, a good example, I think, of going out and engaging lots and lots of different New York City residents. Like there are stories about senior leadership at EDC and City Hall interviewing 500 people across the city and asking, what do we need to do to help diversify the city's economy coming out of 2008 financial recession? So it's certainly an interesting parallel there in terms of a broad city crisis, to which we hope that like a Dream No Small Dreams project would really have impact. I think in terms of the solicitation strategy, there's going to be a lot of similarity. Obviously, the idea of attracting a university to New York City, or leveraging an existing New York City university to expand their work is very similar. I think one thing we're trying to do is be more broad, as I mentioned earlier, in what we're asking for. The Applied Sciences RFP was super focused on creating technology jobs and also creating a tech transfer program that would spur small business growth in the city. And I think it was successful. Like you look across New York now, and there's a thriving tech scene in a way that you could not have said credibly in 2008. Our goals are a little bit different, in the sense of obviously being focused on this interdisciplinary approach to environment. And so allowing a bit more room for respondents to tell us how they can make use of the campus and really engage the public in that work, I think is one area where we're adding some different approaches to what was a super successful project for the city.
Well, this was really, interesting and informative for me, and I hope the rest of the ABNY YPs and everybody in the audience found this, informative. And Claire, really thank you. It's great to see you. Great to hear, more in depth what you're working on Governor's Island. And we really appreciate you taking the time out of your exceptionally busy day and schedule, because it sounds like you've got a lot of things going on, which is again really, really great. But thank you for joining us. Hope everybody has a great day. I will turn it over to Sarah to close us out. But thank you again, Claire, for joining us.
And thank you again for having us. And it was really nice to see you, Michael.
So this concludes our boardroom breakfast. I'd like to echo Michael and Claire. Thank you so much for joining us. I personally learned so much about the island, and I'm really, really excited for what the future of Governor's Island holds. I think it'll be such an interesting thing, and really change the landscape of New York City for the better. So can't wait to see that all. Thank you, Michael, so much for moderating. This was such a fantastic conversation, and this concludes our boardroom breakfast. We hope to see you all at other events soon. Thanks, guys.